Okay, so welcome to Eat, Move, Think, the show about optimal wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Wow. Do it again.
Oh, I was practicing. Okay, ready?
Welcome
to Eat, Move, Think,
the show about
optimal
wellness brought to you by
Medcan.
Yeah, this is extremely good. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, I think this is going to be a great episode for you.
Okay, I'm curious.
Think about the last time you had a day off, or like last weekend.
Yes. Okay, Sunday.
You're hanging out with your friends or your family. Are you thinking about work at the same time?
Always, constantly.
Always?
Yeah.
I knew it. So this is a good episode for you. I think I do the same thing. And in general, people who are listening, people on this show, the hosts, the guests, we all work hard. Like, we're all high performers.
I mean, I find myself lapsing into thinking through lists. Have I done that? Yes. Check. Done that. I need to have a completely checked list in order to allow myself the leisure time, I think.
We've talked a lot about the importance of being able to relax on Eat, Move, Think. Like self-care, getting enough relaxation time with loved ones. It's really important. And if we're stressing about getting things done while you're sitting with your kids or while you're out for a movie, like, are you really resting?
I found this during the most frenzied months of the pandemic when I felt like I was always working. I was kind of fizzling out and maybe not as productive as I would have been otherwise.
Well, if you're stressed while you're working, you're stressed while you're relaxing, you're probably burnt out. You probably burned yourself out. And that can totally stop your productivity altogether and your ability to relax.
All right. Rest, relaxation, it's important. But what does that all have to do with this episode?
So in this episode, we're talking to an expert about how to calm your mind, how to relax, which paradoxically may boost your productivity too.
I'm Chris.
I'm Jazz. We're the producers of Eat, Move, Think.
And this one's going to be a good one.
Yeah, in this episode, we have Medcan's consulting psychologist, Amanda Beaman, and she'll be talking to Chris Bailey. He's a productivity expert based in Ottawa. He has a Bachelor of Commerce from Carleton University, and his 3 best-selling books all about productivity have been translated into 27 different languages.
His 3rd book is called How to Calm Your Mind, and it's about the way we can achieve greater productivity and less anxiety by training ourselves to be more calm.
So important. Sucks that we have to train ourselves to do that. Anyways,
let's get right to it.
Here's Amanda Beaman.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Beaman, and I'm here with Chris Bailey. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Amanda Beaman. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How's your day going so far?
Well, I had a nice sushi lunch with a good friend. I have a nice green tea in front of me here. Read quite a bit this morning, played with my kitten, and so life is good. What about you?
Yeah, sounds like a perfect morning.
Yeah. Like, what could you add to that to make it? I guess my wife, I could add to it, but
Playing with kittens, it's always good.
Oh, we just got a new kitten. Her name is Eleanor. She's named after the first female Nobel laureate in economics because my wife is an economist. And great addition to the fam. Highly recommended. Life.
Yeah, my kids would really like that. Well, it's such a pleasure to meet with you today and to discuss your book. I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, good.
I think it's always nice to find resources. Being a psychologist, I'm always looking for books to recommend to people. So before we dive into the book, I wonder if you could give our listeners a little background on yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What made you want to write a book on calm?
Yeah, exactly. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. Any book that I've written to date, it's this one, when it arrived in the mail, I was so happy just to hold it in my hands because it was the end of a journey that started a few years ago when I was on stage giving a talk to, I think, around 100 people. And I noticed that when I got on stage, I just immediately felt off. I had these beads of sweat forming on the back of my neck. My heart started racing. I felt like just kind of running off the stage and forgetting everything that was happening in that moment. And deconstructing this afterwards, I realized that I was in the middle of an anxiety attack on stage in front of this group of people. And that was kind of the impetus for the journey that became this book, deconstructing the situation that I was in at the time. I think one of the more remarkable parts of my situation was just how unremarkable it is. Deconstructing it with experts, of course, I found I was burnt out. I found I was highly anxious, and I was investing quite a bit in self-care leading up to that point. But yet these feelings or these situations still had room to metastasize in the life that I was living. And so that was what set me off on this journey. Whenever I encounter an obstacle, my usual go-to is to order every single book that I can find about a topic. And barring that, which didn't work as well as I thought it would at the time for overcoming burnout and anxiety, I turned to the literature, the research on these topics to delve deep into calm and how that influences productivity and how that's connected with anxiety and chronic stress, this constellation of topics that you're probably familiar with as well. And it was this fascinating thing, the journey full of unexpected lessons that were summed up in the book we're talking. And I promise that will be the last plug of the book. I'll stop plugging it.
Well, I mean, there's so much that you said there. What's so interesting is that on this podcast, we're often discussing lifestyles, strategies, and habits for high performers. Many of our listeners are strivers, as you kind of referred to in the book.
Yeah.
And they want to be at the top of their game all the time. So it's interesting to kind of reconcile that with, taking care of ourselves. Having these two things together can be challenging. So you discuss this when you define the accomplishment mindset. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that potential costs maybe of striving for productivity.
Yeah, for sure. I think this was, something that I had to reflect on myself. I've written a couple of books on productivity, and I actually think we need productivity more now than ever before. But it depends how we define productivity. And I think a lot of people, when they hear the word productivity, they think of something that is so cold and corporate and all about efficiency and effectiveness and boiling our life down to a spreadsheet that's just full of accomplishments. But we should be thinking about productivity differently. And something that I've always written about, that I continue to write about in this book, productivity is in the subtitle for a very good reason. And it's that productivity is all about intention. When we're perfectly productive, that's the time that we accomplish the things that we set out to do. So if our intention is to, relax on a beach somewhere with 2 pina coladas, 1 for each hand, of course. And then we do. I would argue that we're perfectly productive because we did what we set out to do. And the same is true if we intend to, adopt that high-performing mindset, which, of course, there's nothing wrong with. Goals are incredible to have, especially when they allow us to make a contribution to others through the work and we do in the lives that we live. But if we intend to answer 300 emails and hire somebody new onto our team, while we give a big presentation for the board, while we write a 1,000-word report, and then we do, I would argue we're perfectly productive in that situation too. But there often comes a point when this striving for more no longer has boundaries. And it's because the pursuit of more is addictive in a way. It's based around dopamine, which is the neurochemical that it has the nickname the molecule of more by some neuroscientists that I talked to in this journey. And it's because that provides the neurological underpinnings of this pursuit of more. And there comes a point sometimes, and I found this in my own work, in my own life, where I wanted to strive for more of everything that I had, regardless of the context that I was in. And when we focus on extrinsic success, the more successful we become, the less successful we often feel because we just crave more of everything that we have. And this has direct implications on how much we enjoy our life, how much we savor our life, and also how present we are able to become in the moment. We have this acquisition mentality that activates regions of the brain that are very different from the ones that are activated when we're just present with somebody, having a conversation, having a delicious sushi lunch with somebody, or even us now chatting on a podcast. We need more opportunities for presence. And that's ultimately where productivity comes in too. So the great irony in all of this pursuit of more is we don't only enjoy and savor our lives less, but this pursuit of more actually leads us to become less focused and present because it pulls us out of the moment. And I think, the greater ambition we often have overcompensates for this fact, but we actually are leaving a lot of productivity on the table too when we are unable to cultivate the presence and focus to be able to bring ourselves to whatever it is that we intend to accomplish in the moment. So it is this fascinating constellation of ideas that's at play here.
Mm-hmm. It's this delicate balance of setting goals and planning and being a bit future oriented because we have to, in order to plan, but also grounding ourselves in the moment with what's happening. To be able to enjoy it, but also do our best at it.
Yeah, exactly. And in my opinion, that presence that you just mentioned, that's all productivity is about. If we could all cultivate the presence that we need to focus on whatever it is that we intend to do, we would never have to pick up another productivity book or listen to another podcast on performance ever again in our entire lives. And this is why I talk so much about meditation in my books as well, because of just how much that sharpens our attention and our focus. It seems like a weird path to productivity, this one through calm. But what I've found in my own personal journey is that in an anxious time, in an anxious world, the path to productivity runs straight through calm. And that can be said of a lot of things.
It's a bit of a superpower, really.
Yeah.
To remain calm and present in the face of stressors, right?
Yeah.
Like stressors aren't going to end anytime soon. So
No.
you've got to find a way of being with them.
Yeah.
Speaking of calm, we've kind of been referring to this concept. People may attach different meanings to this word.
Mm-hmm.
How is it defined in your book, by the literature? Let's say, like, how would you, define calm?
The way that I define calm is it is a subjectively positive state with a low level of mental arousal with an accompanying absence of anxiety. When you look at the research that has been conducted on calm, if you plug calm or a calm mind into Google Scholar, for an example, you will not find much. I was very fortunate, though, in really nerding out over the research on this topic, to find that some of the best evidence shows that calm is a construct and it exists on a spectrum. It's on one side of the spectrum, and on the other side, all the way over, is anxiety. And so we think of anxiety as something that we either are or we're not. And I think if I were to draw a sort of anxiety spectrum before going through this journey, I would have drawn this spectrum with anxiety on the right and no anxiety on the left. I'm either anxious or not. But the research does show that spectrum goes from high anxiety, let's put it on the right, all the way down to high calmness. So calm and anxiety are on a continuum with one another. And the difference is that level of arousal and how we relate to our thoughts as well. So we tend to relate to our thoughts in a more neutral or positive way when our mind is less aroused. And we tend to relate to them more in a negative way that tends to fold over on itself and induce feelings of that anxiety where we have those racing or uncontrollable thoughts. We feel on edge. We feel restless. It's difficult to focus, sleep. Sometimes, nausea is a feeling of anxiety that I got when I was going through it. Dizziness, lightheadedness, these feelings of doom that I would have too. They really are on this same spectrum with one another. It was a fascinating finding that we can go past the point of no anxiety to a high state of calm.
Yeah. I mean, that's a survival mechanism that we all need and have. Like, we're not going to be getting rid of anxiety.
No.
anytime
Hopefully
soon,
not.
nor do we want to.
Yeah.
We want to have that survival mechanism in us, but it can feel so all or nothing when you're having it,
Yeah.
right? And people will often want to get rid of it completely. But I like the idea of instead thinking about it on a continuum, kind of normalizes it a bit. It's like, oh, okay, my status is changing. I'm going from calm to more anxious. And I think that just having that visualization of going up and down a continuum could be helpful.
Yeah, and we're always sliding along this spectrum. I really like how you pointed out how, we should have situations in our life that cause us some stress and anxiety sometimes. And one researcher that I talked to, Kelly McGonigal, she's a researcher at Stanford, and she gave the example where if you went through your entire life and eliminated every acutely stressful situation, you would get rid of a lot of the meaning in the process. And the idea is not to live some life that's just devoid of all excitement and stimulation. It's the opposite. It's developing a capacity to be able to deal with situations that happen to be stressful and stimulating in a good way, hopefully. Because the further we go down that calm and anxiety spectrum towards calm, the greater resilience we develop for future anxiety. We have room to slide up without reaching our breaking point. Stress is this fascinating thing where there is sort of a Goldilocks zone, and the once-off stressors are definitely nicer than the stress we have to chronically face each and every day.
Yeah, this brings up a good point. You distinguish between acute and chronic stress in the book, and I think it's a very important distinction to make. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So acute stress is the traffic jam on the way to the airport where we have to catch a flight to Puerto Rico or something. Like it's a one, you step on a Lego block in the middle of the night. Hopefully you're not doing that every single night. The once-off stressors actually add a lot of meaning to our life. That's where a lot of meaning comes from. But the chronic stress is just, we experience it chronically, repeatedly, without an end in sight. Instead of the once-off argument with our spouse, it's the irreconcilable feelings we have when we see their face. Instead of the once-off traffic jam on the way to Puerto Rico or you could tell my mind is on the beach. It's because it snowed so much in Ottawa yesterday. But it's the traffic jam we encounter on our 1.5 hour long each way commute to the office every day. So the chronic stress is the dangerous kind of stress. One primary way that this manifested in my own days is through burnout. Burnout, the research shows, is caused by one thing and one thing only, and that's chronic stress that doesn't let up. And we have this exhaustion, this cynicism, this feeling of deep unproductivity that permeates everything that we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. The acute stress is really what our neurophysiology is designed to handle, right? So, we've got this great system in place to handle acute stressors, but once they become chronic, then our system wasn't designed to deal with that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about burnout some more, but I did want to back up a little bit because many of our listeners who are sort of more achievement oriented may also experience higher levels of chronic stress because of the types of goals that they're wanting to achieve. You discuss in the book about how focusing too much on productivity can lead to being less productive in a sense.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could explain that paradox a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So the three kind of attributes of burnout that I mentioned are exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. And burnout absolutely obliterates how productive we are each and every day, and especially the chronic stress that stems from the burnout that we face. And there's been incredible research conducted on this topic. In my opinion, the world's foremost burnout researcher is Dr. Christina Maslach, who created the Maslach Burnout Inventory. That's the test I took back at the start of this journey to discover my burnout diagnosis. And she was actually also the person that stopped the Stanford prison experiment back in the day. The fella, Philip Zimbardo, who was conducting the experiment, he invited her over to check it out. And she was the only person who saw the experiment who had the wherewithal and the presence of mind to call out kind of a toxic environment where she saw one in that situation. And so she would later marry that fella, Philip Zimbardo. I found that story too fascinating to not include in the book.
Exactly.
She was probably like, I need to stop this guy from doing another experiment like this. How do I do that? I will marry him. No, I don't know.
And then goes on to work in the field of burnout, right? Like toxic workplace environment.
Yeah, exactly. She's in my opinion, it was just incredibly prolific. And the research she's conducted on burnout, one research article in particular that she put together, she kind of broke it down. So burnout is caused by chronic stress, and the three symptoms: exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. But the chronic stress that we often face when it comes from work tends to come from 6 areas of our work. Workload, so when we have way more to do than time to do it in. When we have a lack of control with when, where, and how we work on things. When we have insufficient reward, that's number 3. That's money, but it's also social. So if we're recognized for our contributions, it's also intrinsic, so finding the work meaningful and enjoyable. Community is the 4th one, when we feel closely connected with the people that we work with. Fairness is the 5th factor. So we need to be treated and rewarded fairly. And values is the final factor. So how closely our work is aligned to what we value on a deep level. Because when we can observe ourselves manifesting what we truly value through what we're doing, that's the process through which meaning is made. And that was, those are kind of the 6 areas that this chronic stress tends to metastasize inside of at our work. And so if we're accomplishment oriented and we find ourselves pursuing more of whatever it is that we have in our life without an endpoint in sight, and I think the endpoint is kind of the key there, because a goal without an endpoint is really just a fantasy. And so minding these 6 areas that create burnout, but also create engagement, because burnout and engagement are opposite ends of the same spectrum as well. And so I have this personal activity that I like to do I'd be lying if I said I did it every few weeks or even every month. I do it every few months, but just where I roughly rank out of 10 how each of these areas are going for me, how good my workload is, whether I feel in control of things, how much I feel I'm rewarded, the sense of community I have in my work, whether I feel things are fair, and whether I'm still doing work that aligns to what I value. When we're aligned to these factors, we're engaged. And when we're disaligned to these factors, we are more likely to be burnt out. There's nothing wrong with being driven, of course, provided that we're driven in an intentional and deliberate way. That's kind of the conclusion that I've come to with myself. But minding our mind along the way, not only to protect ourselves against an episode of burnout, which can feel devastating in the moment, but also to preserve future capacity for accomplishment, I think is critical for so many different reasons.
So just for listeners, I'm thinking, they might be wondering, okay, I've assessed these areas and, I'm not ranking the way I want to rank.
Yeah.
It can be kind of insidious, burnout. So I'm wondering, could you let us know a little bit more about signs of burnout, like to look for?
Yeah, for sure. I've always equated feeling exhausted with being burnt out, because in my mind, those 2 things were synonymous with one another. But realizing that exhaustion is one stepping stone on the way to burnout. Realizing that there are 3 attributes to this burnout phenomenon, and that we do need all 3 in order to qualify as being fully burnt out. So we need to feel exhaustion. We need to also feel cynical, which is this pervasive feeling of negativity. And we also need a sense of inefficacy in the work that we do. So we need to feel on this deep level that what we do just couldn't make a difference in the lives of other people, or just in terms of feeding that value of progress that so many of us have. And these 3 characteristics of burnout should serve as sort of tripwires to making you aware that you're on your way to a full-blown burnout phenomenon. And so if you're feeling exhausted, you might not feel cynical or unproductive. You might still feel productive or, perfectly neutral or happy in your mind, but exhausted at the same time. Notice also cynicism in addition to exhaustion. Notice inefficacy and know that these 3 stepping stones should be a tripwire to reflect on how well you're doing with those 6 factors. And I fully recognize that our situations are not always in our control. Sometimes our work is defined and dictated by other people, but there are usually inroads that we can make, regardless of our level of autonomy, that normalizes our workload, which can maximize our performance, actually, to gain a bit more control over what we do, to find a deeper sense of community, to fight for fairness where we work. It's always worthwhile, not only because we'll become more productive, but also because we'll defend our mind against this devastating phenomenon. And so when you notice those phenomena, exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy, check up quickly on how well you're doing with those 6 factors, because they might be misaligned in ways that you don't quite realize.
And then you started to talk a little bit about what to do should you be burnt out.
Yeah.
I think you described from your own personal examples in the book, like kind of some of the things you did. I was wondering if you could share a bit of that with listeners.
Yeah, for sure. So for my workload, I was doing a lot of corporate consulting engagements for productivity. And I found that was far less rewarding. It wasn't really aligned to what I valued. I wasn't sure if there was much community or fairness or reward in there, and it was just adding to workload and decreasing my lack of control. And so looking at the triggers that the different elements of my work set off, that was a big problem area for me in terms of consulting. And so I cut all the consulting that I did out of my life. For community, I found closer connections with colleagues of mine because our work is becoming far more isolating than it used to be. We have fewer connections at work and at home. And so fighting for a sense of community, which fighting is the right word there. And we meet weekly now to keep each other accountable, which feels great. Values, having work more aligned to what I'm fortunate that I work for myself. I run my own business. And so I could mold the work that I did to really value contributing to others. So in terms of having more time to speak to organizations and coach others and create work that hopefully makes a difference and helps other people out. So I really did work through these 6 factors, and not all of them were out of whack. And some people have a great sense of community with their coworkers, but they're just not treated fairly. Other people have an incredible workload, but really not much of that community. And so it really does vary depending on the person. But going through defining my productivity hours every day, so the hours in which I would focus and get things done, to really have that accomplishment mindset where I would strive to achieve things at work, but then setting it aside when those hours were done, it's sometimes messy.
Sounds like quite a journey.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to understand that these things exist, but it's another thing to have a process to be able to help yourself, which I think is really great.
Well, I think that's the key here. Burnout is this, and I found it to be this weird phenomenon that I'd heard a lot about, but we need that tactical strategy. That's why we should pick up a book like any book on a subject like burnout or anxiety. We need the tactics, and luckily these ones work well.
You also mentioned in the book the concept of engagement. What do you mean by engagement? And then how could we become more engaged? Yeah,
so engagement is really that presence of mind. On a technical level, it's when we are what researchers call perceptually coupled with something. We're focused on something. So our thoughts are aligned to our actions, which is aligned to how we're feeling. Over the course of this journey, I've measured my productivity in a lot of different ways. But the question that I'll now ask at the end of the day is, how engaged was I today? And engagement is that opposite of burnout. So if we flip those burnout triggers around, instead of being exhausted, we're fired up. Instead of being cynical, we feel like there's this optimistic light behind everything that we're doing. Instead of feeling inefficacious, we feel as though we're making a big difference with how we're spending our time, our attention, our energy each and every day.
Do you have tips on how we might become more engaged?
Yeah. Well, we become more engaged by flipping those 6 triggers around.
Okay.
These kind of 6 triggers are the wheels on the cart that moves us between that spectrum of burnt out and engaged. And so getting a workload that means that there's always a bit of time pressure behind what you're doing. Not too much, not an overwhelming amount of time pressure, but a bit of time pressure that kind of propels you forward, moving to a different role that allows us to have more control over how we work, finding those deep connections at work, investing in them, and realizing how the work we do connects to what we value, and maybe finding work that is more aligned because we'll become more naturally motivated and productive in those kinds of circumstances.
There's the idea of savoring that comes up in the book too. How would this relate to what we've discussed so far?
Yeah. Savoring leads to engagement. There are kind of those 2 networks where we have this acquisition mentality, which is based primarily around dopamine. And then we have this here and now network of our mind that leads us to that presence, that leads us to engagement, that has other neurochemicals associated with it that make us feel pride and connection. So serotonin and oxytocin. And savoring is almost a way of activating that here and now network in our brain that leads us to enjoyment. So savoring was one of the most fascinating subjects I encountered in writing this book by a wide margin, because it is the process through which we convert a positive experience into a positive emotion. Just that sentence, like I love this so much because I am drinking a delicious jasmine tea right now while we chat. And just because I drink this tea does not mean that I'll enjoy it. And this science of savoring, interestingly, and I don't know why, I don't know if you would have a guess, but women find it easier to savor things than men. Do you have a guess as to why that is? I have no idea.
I don't know, because it's really like savoring sounds a lot to me like the concept of mindfulness, right? It's kind of like bringing yourself to the present moment. And there are studies looking at just dispositional mindfulness.
Oh, interesting. I know when I'm on a meditation retreat, it's about 80, maybe sometimes 90% women. Yeah.
Maybe that's, they're just more drawn to it, right? Childcare.
Maybe. Yeah.
You need to be present. You can't be distracted. I don't know.
Yeah, you can't be off in your own.
But
Yeah, that's a pretty good theory, actually. So women find it far easier to savor things than men. But the fascinating thing about savoring is really we just have to luxuriate in an experience or marvel at something. So think of a kitten, basking in the glow of some sun on the floor, right? We can luxuriate in something. We can feel grateful for something. We can marvel at something like the ocean or the sky. And one thing that I personally love to do is keep a savor list. And so on this list is everything that I love to savor throughout the day. And every day I make sure to pick one. And it is a skill that you can get better at over time. At the beginning, I found that my mind was just so averse to this practice because I just wanted to do more and accomplish more and acquire more. But I found that oddly enough, like as we become better at savoring things, we become more nimble and able to enter into this presence mode. It becomes far more easier to focus because our mind becomes less stimulated in the process. And doing so actually creates effective memory traces in our mind, kind of like when we walk through a forest once, and then we can find our way back because maybe there's footprints in the snow. And this path actually allows us to enjoy something more deeply and more completely. So anticipating something leads to more enjoyment. So it's a way of getting more enjoyment out of our lives. And the best part is it is this skill that we can get better at over time. It's one of my favorite ways of spending time. And I think I hope people will agree after they try it on for size.
Mm-hmm. So there's probably so much more we could talk about, but wanted to ask you if there were other areas, or did you have suggestions for other areas of our lives we could focus on?
Yeah.
I mean, anything in addition to what you've already told us?
Oh man. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. It's so fun to chat. And a lot of folks, when you go through the interview process, you can tell when they don't read the book. But I can tell you, it's always so refreshing when somebody's familiar. And so I think we covered a lot of ground. One thing that I would cover is the analog world. We talk about super stimuli. We talk about social media. And when we look at kind of our different heights of stimulation, usually the ones that are towards the top that lead to a more stimulated, anxious mind, they are found in the digital world. Whereas calm can be found usually in the analog. We kind of have these three different types of activities that we can do over the course of the day. We have the analog only activities. So, brushing our teeth or walking through nature. We have the digital only activities. So social media, email, that sort of thing. And then we have the ones we can do in both, where that's writing, it's brainstorming, it's keeping our daily to-do list, it's time with friends, it's reading a good book, it's playing games that we can play a video game or a board game. Which one's more meaningful? It's consuming the news. We can consume that online, or we can subscribe to the physical paper, which is my favorite subscription service in my life. And analog moments exist at a lower level of stimulation. It's grabbing brunch with some friends in an afternoon and nobody really has their phone, and you get to wake up with one another. It's playing cards with the family at the cottage. It's the looking at the trees out the car window when you're on a family road trip. We get satisfaction, we get meaning from the analog world more so than the digital world. This is not to say that there's no meaning in the digital world. Taylor Swift liked one of my tweets one time, and that was pretty cool. But most of our meaning, when we look back at the most meaningful moments, they exist in the analog. And so the thing that, I think one more thing to mention is when meaning matters, try doing something the analog way, and when efficiency matters, which it does a lot of the time, then something is usually worth doing digitally. But having a dividing line between these two worlds and bringing more activities into the analog is a surefire way of calming, especially when we can't tab over to Twitter or Facebook. Anxiety is addictive when it becomes comfortable. I've found that mental resistance was what was truly, truly great when I tried to force myself to come down. And one technique that works really well for this is a dopamine fast. It's often called a dopamine fast, which is completely a misnomer because we can't fast from dopamine when we lean on dopamine to think logically and creatively. So to truly fast from dopamine, we'd need to be in a coma, but even then our body would be relying on dopamine. I've come to think of it as sort of a stimulation fast. And my first stimulation fast, I really remember it fondly. All you do for a stimulation fast, I say all you do like it's easy. It's a pain. It's a huge pain in the ass. But the benefits that you get are absolutely profound. So for 1 month, you cut out anything that is super stimuli. So that means social media. That means online news. That means email on your phone if that's something you fall victim to a lot. You define these deliberate boundaries around super stimuli and you do not cross them, right? It's the digital news, it's the social media, the dopaminergic activities and distractions that you wish to weed out. And in their place, you find better rounded activities, probably a lot of ones from the analog world, movement, people, connection, creativity, picking up an instrument you haven't touched in a while, going through the stack of books that have accumulated as you've spent more time on your phone, volunteering, the different activities we can sub in for the old distractions. And then you notice what changes and how you feel over the course of the month. And of course, do consult with someone if you are coming down from anything that could be considered addictive, like drug use and a lot of high technology use. And honestly, the changes were remarkably profound. In day 1 or 2, I think it was, I'm probably misremembering, but there were receipts on my desk that were just sitting there for quite some time that I then filed and organized and took care of, and my desk was clean. And I started looking around, and I was playing the piano that was beside me more, that I keep within kind of grabbing distance. And my office was, my desk, I had time to it's amazing how much time we spend on things that don't provide us with gratification, but instead just provide us with dopamine. And I did not want to go back after this experiment finished. After it, I did go back, because super stimuli are so difficult to resist in the moment, but once they popped up, did another fast, and away they went once more. So it is a process, but it is one that is so worthwhile and great way to find more meaning and satisfaction around us.
As you were talking, I was thinking, so we just go back to living the way that our parents lived before the internet.
The way we lived like 15, 20 years ago. Imagine that.
You used to come home and read a book. There was still TV.
Or they were paid to be on call and didn't volunteer to be on call.
Just one last question, if you don't mind. What are the 3 biggest tips you have for listeners?
Oh, there's so many.
This is a hard question to answer, I know.
Maybe number 1, as you invest in Calm, keep track of how much you accomplish. We often have this relaxation guilt that arises when we lower our mental stimulation height, but we accomplish more than we believe we do, often because we suck at measuring our productivity. We look to how busy we are or how exhausted we are instead of how much we actually accomplish. Number 2, define those productivity hours. And I mention this because it's something that I mentioned very briefly. At the start of the day, choose the time you'll begin to care about productivity and stop caring about productivity at work. And this might mean having an hour in the evening to work. It's fine. 1 hour in the evening is better than being kind of connected all day long and experiencing constant chronic stress. And make a savor list because the benefits of savoring life are too great to pass up. Yeah.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your book and some of the great ideas that have come out of your journey. And as I said, it was just so great to read something that had useful strategies, but also had this personal touch of having your background. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Okay, take care.
That was Amanda Beaman, Medcan consulting psychologist, in conversation with productivity expert Chris Bailey.
His new book is called How to Calm Your Mind, and it's out now, so check it out.
Available wherever books are sold. If you feel like you could benefit from a consultation with a Medcan expert about how to achieve calm, contact booking team at medcan.com.
You can say hello, send us a tip or a suggestion by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
We'll post episode highlights and links you can visit on our website at eatmovethinkpodcast.com. Follow Medcan on Twitter and Instagram at MedcanLiveWell.
Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau. I'm Jasmine Ratch, managing producer. Social media and strategy support is from Chantel Gertin, Andrew Imix, and Emily Bozick.
I'm executive producer Christopher Scholgen. Check us out next week for a conversation with 2 Medcan experts about how to have difficult conversations about mental health, like checking in with somebody who may be struggling and where to go from there. It's a good episode. We're looking forward to sharing that one with you.
It's another really important one, so stay tuned.
This podcast is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with the specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.